The yacht's deck hummed with electromagnetic energy as Clara's fingers flew across the keyboard. Racing against time. Outside, explosions lit up the harbor like daylight. Meridian's corporate death squad closed in. "We're out of time," Clara whispered, her face illuminated by the laptop's glow. 96% complete. So close. Evan gripped Tommy's modified torque wrench, his brother's final legacy. "They killed him for this," he said, his voice tight with rage. "They're not getting away with it." The Coast Guard cutter materialized through the storm like an avenging angel, spotlights cutting through darkness. The radio crackled, "Dr. Sinclair, this is Commander Chen. We've been monitoring your transmissions." Clara's eyes met Evan's, a small-town mechanic and a corporate whistleblower, against a murderous energy giant. The battle for justice was about to change everything. Like and subscribe for more heart-pounding stories of ordinary heroes fighting corrupt corporations. Will David defeat Goliath? How far would you go to expose the truth? Hit that notification bell to find out. In the salt-weathered harbor of Millbrook Bay, where fishing boats outnumbered dreams and the scent of low tide mingled with diesel fumes, Evan Callahan thought he'd seen every kind of engine that could sputter to life on the water. For 15 years, he'd been the town's go-to mechanic, his calloused hands bringing dead motors back from the grave, while his own life remained stalled in neutral. A widower raising his teenage daughter Sadie alone. Evan had learned to expect little beyond the next repair job and the promise of another quiet evening. Watching the sunset paint the harbor gold, the morning fog rolled off Millbrook Bay like a slowly breathing ghost, revealing the harbor one weathered plank at a time. Evan stood at the edge of his pier, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the daily resurrection of his world. The routine never changed. 6:30 sharp. He'd unlock the garage doors, flip the ancient radio to the marine weather report, and survey the boats that waited like faithful dogs for his attention. Behind him, the floorboards creaked with familiar footsteps. Sadie appeared in the doorway, 17 years old and carrying herself like someone who'd learned early that the world demanded more than it gave. Her dark hair, so much like her mother's, hung in careful waves that hid half her face. She clutched a sketchbook against her chest, its pages filled with meticulous drawings of boats, seabirds, and the endless dance between water and sky. "Dad, Mrs. Henderson wants to know if you can look at her outboard today. She says it's making that sound again." Evan smiled. Mrs. Henderson's 15-year-old Johnson made the same sound every spring, a grinding protest that meant nothing more than old parts settling into another season. "Tell her I'll swing by after lunch. What have you got there?" He nodded toward the sketchbook. Sadie's grip tightened almost imperceptibly. Since her mother's death 3 years ago, she'd retreated into art the way others might retreat into prayer or drink. Just some studies, nothing important. Everything was important to Sadie, but she'd stopped believing anyone else would see it that way. The divorce from her mother had been brutal, full of accusations and lawyers who treated a teenager's preference like a commodity to be negotiated. When Sarah died in that car accident, the custody battle died with her, but the damage lingered like a scar that pulled tight in cold weather. "I'm heading to Morrison's to pick up parts. Want to come along?" She shook her head, already stepping back toward the house. "I've got that history paper to finish." Evan watched her go, noting the slight hunch of her shoulders that spoke of someone carrying invisible weight without her mother. He felt like a mechanic trying to repair an engine without understanding its language. That's when he saw her. The yacht appeared through the dissipating fog like something from a different world, 50 feet of pristine white fiberglass and chrome, with lines so clean they seemed to cut through the water without disturbing it. She moved under sail alone, her engine silent. Guided by a single figure at the helm, Evan had seen plenty of expensive boats in his years working the harbor, but this one was different. The hull design suggested speed and efficiency that went beyond mere luxury. The electronics array bristled with equipment that belonged on military vessels, not pleasure craft, and the way she moved through the water too smooth, too quiet, as if she'd been designed to leave no trace of her passage. The woman steering wore a simple white shirt and navy pants, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. even from a distance. Evan could see the focused intensity in her posture, the way she handled the yacht with the confidence that came from real knowledge rather than casual weekend sailing. She brought the boat alongside the guest pier with a precision that spoke of countless hours at sea. Evan finished his coffee and headed down to the pier. Harbor courtesy demanded that he at least offer assistance, though something about the whole scene made him cautious. "Morning," he called as the woman secured her lines. "Welcome to Millbrook Bay." She looked up, and Evan felt a small jolt of recognition that made no sense. Her face was elegant but tired, with the kind of weariness that came from more than just a long passage. Her eyes were the color of deep water, blue-green and carefully guarded. "Thank you. I'm Clara Sinclair. I understand you're the harbor's mechanic." Her voice carried the faintest trace of an accent, something that might have been European, but had been softened by years of American living. She stepped onto the pier with the easy balance of someone who'd spent serious time on boats, but her hands were too soft for commercial fishing, too clean for engine work. "Evan Callahan, what can I do for you?" "I'm having engine trouble. Nothing catastrophic, but I'd rather not push my luck. Would you have time to take a look?" Evan nodded, though something in her tone suggested this was more than routine maintenance. "Sure. Let me grab my tools." As he walked back to the garage, he found himself wondering about Clara Sinclair. The yacht flew a Massachusetts registration, but the wear patterns on her deck suggested she'd been living aboard for months, maybe longer. Her clothes were expensive but practical, chosen for durability rather than fashion. And there was something in her eyes that reminded him of Saadi, that careful distance that came from protecting secrets. The engine compartment was where things got interesting. Evan had worked on everything from ancient one-cylinder fishing boats to modern yachts bristling with computer-controlled systems. He'd seen experimental engines, hybrid systems, even a few boats powered by hydrogen fuel cells. But Clara's engine was something else entirely. The basic configuration was familiar marine diesel. Water-cooled, designed for long-distance cruising, but the modifications were extraordinary. The injection system had been completely rebuilt with components that looked like they belonged in a laboratory. The cooling system incorporated materials he didn't recognize, arranged in patterns that suggested heat recovery and recycling far beyond normal marine applications. Most striking of all was the control system. Instead of the standard mechanical linkages and electronic sensors, Clara's engine was governed by a computer interface that looked like it had been borrowed from a spacecraft. The display showed operating parameters in real time, tracking efficiency ratios and performance metrics with scientific precision. "This is remarkable work," Evan said, running his hands over the modified components. "Who did the conversion?" Clara hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "A specialty shop in Newport. They do custom work for racing yachts." It was a reasonable answer, but something in her tone suggested it wasn't the complete truth. Racing yachts needed speed and reliability, but this engine was designed for something else: efficiency and stealth. The ability to run long distances without leaving the normal signatures of passage. 2 days later, Evan was deep in the engine compartment of Clara's yacht when his fingers found something that shouldn't have been there. Tucked beneath a panel housing the fuel injection system was a small plastic card, slightly yellowed with age and bearing the distinctive blue and silver logo of Meridian Energy Corporation. The factory ID badge showed a photograph of a younger man with Evan's same dark eyes and stubborn jaw. Thomas M. Callahan. Employee 1R44771, Manufacturing Division. The expiration date was 5 years old, exactly when Tommy had died in what the company called an industrial accident. Evan's hands began to shake as he stared at his brother's face. The badge felt impossibly heavy in his palm, a ghost made manifest in the confined space of the engine compartment. He'd thought he'd moved past the worst of the grief, had learned to live with the questions that would never be answered. But here was Tommy's ID badge, hidden in the yacht of a woman who claimed to know nothing about Meridian Energy. "Everything all right down there?" Clara's voice drifted down from the deck, casual and concerned. Evan slipped the badge into his pocket, his mind racing. How had Tommy's factory ID ended up in Clara's engine compartment? Had she known Tommy? Was she connected to Meridian Energy somehow? Just found something interesting, he called back, trying to keep his voice steady. I'll be up in a minute. He forced himself to complete the sensor replacement, his hands moving through familiar motions while his thoughts churned. Tommy had been 28 when he died, working the night shift at Meridian's chemical processing plant outside Portland. The official report blamed operator error. Tommy had supposedly bypassed safety protocols and been overcome by hydrogen sulfide gas. The company had paid a modest settlement to avoid publicity, and the case had been closed within 6 months. But Evan had never believed the official story. Tommy had been safety obsessed, the kind of worker who double-checked every procedure and never took shortcuts. He'd been working toward his supervisor certification, studying engineering manuals in his spare time, talking about making the plant safer for everyone. The idea that he deliberately circumvented safety systems was absurd. Evan climbed back up to the deck where Clara was sitting in the cockpit with a cup of coffee and a tablet computer. She looked up as he emerged, and he caught something in her expression, a flicker of watchfulness that seemed at odds with her casual demeanor. How's the repair coming? Sensors replaced. I need to run some tests to make sure everything's calibrated properly. He settled into the seat across from her, studying her face. Clara, I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate a straight answer. Her body language shifted almost imperceptibly, a subtle tensing that suggested she was preparing for something she'd been expecting. Of course. Evan pulled the ID badge from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. Clara's face went completely still, the color draining from her cheeks. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. That's my brother, Evan said quietly. He died 5 years ago in an accident at Meridian Energy. His name was Tommy Callahan, and according to the company, he made a mistake that cost him his life. What I want to know is why his ID badge was hidden in your engine compartment. Clara stared at the badge as if it were a snake coiled to strike when she finally looked up. Her eyes held a depth of pain that matched his own. I was hoping you'd never have to know about this. Know about what? Clara was quiet for so long that Evan began to wonder if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Tommy didn't make a mistake. He was murdered. The words hit Evan like a physical blow. He'd suspected, had lived with nagging doubts for 5 years, but hearing it stated so boldly made the harbor seem to tilt around him. How do you know that? Because I'm the reason he's dead. Clara stood abruptly and walked to the rail, her back to him. Evan could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful control that was barely holding her together. My name is Clara Sinclair now, but 5 years ago, I was Dr. Clara Hoffman, Chief Innovation Officer for Meridian Energy Corporation. I developed the chemical processing system that your brother was working on when he died. Evan felt something cold and sharp unfold in his chest. The woman he'd been growing to respect, maybe even care about, was connected to the company that had killed Tommy. More than connected, she'd helped design the system that had taken his brother's life. You worked for Meridian. I worked for them, and I believed in what we were doing. Clean energy, environmental responsibility, all the buzzwords that made it easy to ignore the corners we were cutting. She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Your brother discovered that the safety protocols I designed were being deliberately circumvented to increase production speed. He was going to report it, so they killed him. They made it look like an accident, but Tommy had been asking questions, pushing for investigations. He'd found evidence that the company was falsifying safety data, exposing workers to dangerous chemicals to meet production quotas. Clara's voice grew stronger, more controlled. He was going to blow the whistle, so they silenced him and made it look like his own carelessness. Evan stared at her, trying to process the magnitude of what she was telling him. Tommy hadn't just died in an accident, he'd been murdered for trying to protect other workers. And the woman sitting across from him had been part of the system that killed him. Why should I believe you? Because I have proof. Clara disappeared below deck and returned with a laptop computer. After Tommy died, I started investigating. What I found made me realize that Meridian wasn't just cutting corners. They were systematically covering up industrial accidents, bribing inspectors, falsifying environmental data. They were a criminal organization masquerading as an energy company. She opened the laptop and showed him a screen full of documents and technical diagrams. Even from a distance, Evan could see references to chemical processing systems, safety protocols, and incident reports. I spent 2 years gathering evidence, trying to build a case that would hold up in court, but the more I learned, the more dangerous it became. Meridian has connections everywhere: regulatory agencies, law enforcement, even federal oversight committees. When I finally tried to go public, they destroyed my career and put a target on my back. So you ran. I ran, and I've been running ever since. The yacht, the false identity, the constant moving, it's all to stay one step ahead of people who would rather see me dead than have the truth come out. Evan looked down at Tommy's ID badge, trying to reconcile this new information with everything he thought he knew. His brother hadn't died because of his own mistake. He died because he tried to do the right thing. And Clara wasn't just a mysterious woman seeking refuge. She was a whistleblower carrying evidence that could bring down the company responsible for Tommy's death. Why do you have his badge? I took it from his locker after the funeral, along with his safety reports, his correspondence with supervisors, anything that might serve as evidence someday. Clara's voice broke slightly. I've been carrying pieces of your brother with me for 5 years, waiting for the chance to get justice for him and all the others. Others? Tommy wasn't the first, and he wasn't the last. Meridian has been covering up worker deaths for decades. I have documentation of at least 30 cases where employees died under suspicious circumstances after raising safety concerns. Evan felt a surge of rage so intense it made his vision blur. 30 people, 30 families destroyed by corporate greed and systematic murder. Tommy had been just one name on a list of inconvenient employees who'd been silenced to protect profit margins. Why come here? Why risk exposing yourself? Clara gestured toward the engine compartment. Because I finally have what I need to destroy them. The engine modifications you've been working on, they're not just for efficiency. I've been using this yacht to gather evidence from Meridian facilities all along the coast. Environmental sampling, surveillance footage, intercepted communications, everything I need to prove their crimes. And they know you're getting close. The engine problems weren't mechanical failure, they were sabotage. Meridian's security people found me in Bar Harbor 2 weeks ago and tried to disable the yacht. I managed to get away, but the damage forced me to seek repairs. Evan looked at Clara with new understanding. She wasn't just running from corporate lawyers or investigators. She was being hunted by people who'd already killed to protect their secrets. Coming to Millbrook Bay had been an act of desperation, not choice. What happens now? I finish uploading the evidence to secure servers, then disappear again. Find a new identity, a new boat. Keep moving until I can find someone in law enforcement who isn't on Meridian's payroll. And Tommy's murderers go free. For now, but eventually, the evidence will surface. Someone will investigate. Justice will come, even if it takes years. Evan stood up, Tommy's ID badge clenched in his fist. 5 years of unanswered questions, 5 years of grief and doubt and carefully suppressed rage, all crystallizing into a moment of perfect clarity. No, Clara looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. No more running, no more waiting for someone else to care enough to investigate. If you have evidence that can bring down the people who killed my brother, then we're going to make sure it sees the light of day. Evan, you don't understand what you're suggesting. These people have unlimited resources, no moral constraints, and a proven willingness to kill. If you help me, you're putting yourself and Sadie in mortal danger. They already put us in danger when they murdered Tommy. The only question is whether we're going to let them get away with it. Clara studied his face, and he could see her weighing risks and possibilities when she finally spoke. Her voice carried a note of hope that hadn't been there before. If we do this, we do it right. No half measures, no mistakes. We get all the evidence uploaded and distributed to every major news organization and law enforcement agency simultaneously. Create too much exposure for them to contain. Evan nodded. What do you need with time? secure internet access, and a way to transmit several terabytes of data without Meridian's security people tracking the source. How long? 48 hours. Maybe less if everything goes smoothly. Evan looked out across the harbor, where his neighbors were going about their daily routines in blissful ignorance of the corporate conspiracy that had reached into their quiet community. Tomorrow, Sadie would be getting ready for school. Mrs. Henderson would be worrying about her outboard motor, and the lobster boats would be heading out for another day's work. But Tommy would still be dead, and his murderers would still be free. 48 hours, Evan said, but we do this together, and we make sure every last one of those bastards pays for what they've done. Clara smiled for the first time since he'd found the ID badge. And in that smile, he saw something that reminded him why he'd been drawn to her in the first place. Beneath the careful, guarded exterior was someone who'd sacrificed everything for the sake of truth and justice. Someone worth fighting alongside, no matter what the cost. That evening, Evan sent Sadie to stay with her aunt in Boston. His daughter had protested, her artist's eyes seeing far more than he'd explained, but she'd finally agreed on the condition that he tell her everything when it was over, with Sadie safely away. Evan and Clara began preparing for their mission. The Millbrook Bay Library stood dark against the storm-swept evening, its colonial brick facade streaming with rain. Evan pulled into the small parking lot behind the building, where Margaret Chen's ancient Honda Civic sat like a faithful sentinel beside the employee entrance. Through the rear windows, he could see the glow of computer screens in the reference section. The fiber connection runs directly to the university server farm in Portland, Margaret explained, gesturing toward a workstation positioned away from the windows. Speed tests show consistent upload rates of about 2 gigabits per second should be more than adequate for whatever you need to transmit. Evan stared at her, amazed by the casual efficiency with which she'd prepared for their operation. Margaret, you could lose your job for this. Maybe face criminal charges? At my age, job security isn't my primary concern. And as for criminal charges, well, sometimes civil disobedience is the only way to achieve civil justice. She handed him a set of keys. Lock up when you're finished. The security system will remain disabled until morning. What if someone asks why you were here so late? I'll tell them I was working on the quarterly budget reports. Boring enough that no one will ask for details. Margaret's smile held decades of accumulated wisdom about small-town politics and plausible deniability. Besides, in a place like Millbrook Bay, people mind their own business until it becomes everyone's business. After Margaret left, Evan waited in the darkened library for Clara's arrival. The storm had intensified, with wind-driven rain lashing the windows and thunder rolling across the harbor like artillery fire. Weather reports called for the system to peak around midnight, perfect cover for their clandestine activities. Clara appeared at the rear entrance precisely at 9 a.m., moving through the storm like a shadow given substance. She carried a waterproof case containing her laptop and the encrypted drives. Her movements economical and purposeful, despite the driving rain. Any problems? Evan asked as he let her in. None so far, though I'm monitoring several concerning indicators in Meridian's communication traffic. They're definitely mobilizing resources to track me down. Well, how long do we have? Hard to say. Could be hours, could be days. But their search pattern is tightening. Clara followed him to the computer lab, her eyes automatically cataloging escape routes and potential defensive positions. The good news is that once the upload starts, they'll need time to trace the transmission source. The bad news is that they'll probably figure out it's coming from this area. She opened her laptop and began connecting it to the library's high-speed network, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the keyboard. Multiple windows cascaded across the screen file transfer protocols, security monitors, communication channels that would simultaneously broadcast the evidence to news organizations and law enforcement agencies around the world. This is it, Clara said quietly. Once I initiate the upload sequence, there's no stopping it. The evidence will propagate through multiple servers, creating redundant copies that can't be suppressed or destroyed. Evan watched the preparation process with growing tension. The stakes had never felt more real than they did now. sitting in the quiet library while Clara prepared to trigger a corporate earthquake that would ripple around the globe. "Are you ready?" she asked, her finger hovering over the enter key. Evan thought about Tommy, working late shifts at the chemical plant while studying for his supervisor certification, about all the workers who had died in accidents that weren't really accidents, about communities poisoned by environmental contamination that had been covered up for decades. "Do it!" Clara pressed enter. The screen exploded into activity as files began uploading to servers around the world. Progress bars crept steadily forward, each percentage point representing another piece of evidence that would help destroy Meridian Energy's criminal conspiracy. "How long?" Evan asked. 6 hours for the complete upload, but the most damaging files will be transmitted in the first 2 hours, enough to trigger investigations and media coverage even if we're interrupted. They settled into vigilant waiting, monitoring the upload progress while staying alert for any signs of discovery. The storm continued to rage outside, providing natural cover for their activities but also creating an atmosphere of barely controlled chaos that matched their internal tension. Then, without warning, Clara's laptop screen flickered and died. For a heartbeat, Evan thought the storm had caused a power outage. Then Clara's face went completely white, and he realized that the sudden darkness was far more sinister than any natural phenomenon. "They've found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain hammering against the library windows. "Remote shutdown? They're inside our network." "How is that possible?" "Because someone who knows my security protocols is helping them, someone who understands exactly how I've been staying hidden for 5 years. The laptop screen flickered back to life, but instead of Clara's file transfer interface, it displayed a video call window. The face that appeared made Clara recoil as if she'd been struck. Dr. Michael Reeves looked exactly as Clara remembered him: sandy hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of earnest expression that had once made her believe he shared her commitment to environmental responsibility. But his eyes held a coldness that chilled Evan to the bone. "Hello, Clara. It's been a long time." "Michael." Clara's voice was steady, but Evan could see her hands trembling. "I should have known. You always were ambitious enough to sell your soul for the right price." "Ambition had nothing to do with it. This is about loyalty, corporate loyalty, which you've apparently forgotten." Michael's image leaned forward, and Evan could see what looked like a corporate office behind him: expensive furniture, panoramic windows, the trappings of executive power. "Do you have any idea how much damage your little crusade has caused? How many good people have lost their jobs because of your vindictive fantasies?" "Good people?" Clara's composure cracked slightly. "Michael, you helped me develop the safety protocols that they've been systematically ignoring. You know as well as I do that Tommy Callahan and dozens of others were murdered to protect profit margins. Tommy Callahan died because he couldn't follow simple safety procedures. The company conducted a thorough investigation, and operator error was clearly established." Michael's tone carried the practiced authority of someone who'd repeated the same lies so many times he'd begun to believe it himself. "What you call murder, I call unfortunate workplace accidents that have been blown out of proportion by a disgruntled former employee with obvious psychological issues." "You bastard!" Evan found his voice. "I'm Tommy's brother, and I know he didn't make any mistakes. He was the most safety-conscious worker in that plant." Michael's gaze shifted to Evan with predatory interest. "Ah, the local muscle. Yes, we know all about you. Mr. Callahan, struggling boat mechanic, bitter widower raising a teenage daughter on whatever scraps you can earn in this backwater fishing village. Hardly the ideal witness for a credible investigation." "Clara," Michael continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "I want you to stop this insanity before it destroys everything we've worked to build. Meridian Energy is on the verge of revolutionary breakthroughs in clean technology. The environmental applications alone could transform how the world generates power. But that work requires capital, infrastructure, and the kind of long-term planning that isn't possible when corporate resources are being wasted on frivolous lawsuits and regulatory investigations." "Revolutionary breakthroughs!" Clara's voice dripped with contempt. You mean like the hydrogen fuel cell technology that exploded at the Newark facility? Or the experimental battery systems that contaminated groundwater in 3 different states? Necessary risks in the pursuit of scientific progress. You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Those weren't eggs, Michael. They were human lives. Acceptable losses in service of a greater good that you're apparently too small-minded to comprehend. Evans stared at the screen in horrified fascination. Michael Reeves wasn't just defending corporate crimes, he genuinely believed that murder and environmental destruction were justified in pursuit of technological advancement. The man was a sociopath with a PhD in a corner office. Clara, you have exactly 10 minutes to delete all copies of your stolen files and surrender yourself to our security team. They're positioned around the library as we speak, waiting for my signal. And if I refuse, then Mr. Callahan and his daughter will join the list of acceptable losses. Michael's casual tone made the threat even more chilling. We know Sadie is staying with her aunt in Boston. Very responsible of you to get her out of harm's way. But Boston isn't nearly far enough to guarantee her safety. Evan felt ice crystallize in his veins. These people were threatening his daughter, the most important person in his world, the only family he had left after Tommy's death. The protective fury that rose in his chest was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. You touch her, and I'll kill you myself. I doubt that very much. But your concern for her welfare is touching and ultimately irrelevant. Clara, 8 minutes. The video call window displayed a countdown timer that began at 8:00 and immediately started ticking backward. Each second brought them closer to a confrontation that Evan was beginning to understand. They couldn't win through conventional means. How many people do they have outside? Evan asked. Clara was frantically typing on her laptop, trying to bypass the network intrusion and restore the file transfer protocols. Doesn't matter. Even if we could fight our way out of here, they just track us down again. Michael knows every security measure I've ever used, every safe house I've ever established, every contact I've ever cultivated. Then we need to change the game. How? Evan was thinking furiously. Drawing on years of solving mechanical problems under pressure, every system had vulnerabilities, including corporate security operations staffed by people who thought small-town Americans were too stupid to fight back effectively. Michael, he called toward the laptop screen. You said you know all about me. Struggling boat mechanic, right? That's correct. Then you probably also know that I learned my trade from my father. Who learned it from his father before him? 3 generations of Callahans working on boats in Millbrook Bay? Your point. My point is that you don't know what I'm capable of, or what this community is capable of when we're threatened by outside forces. Mr. Callahan, you're hardly in a position to make threats. I'm not making threats. I'm making promises. Evan moved to the library's window and looked out at the storm-lashed harbor. You want to play hardball with people who've been weathering storms longer than your corporation has existed? Let's see how well your security team handles a little local hospitality. He pulled out his cell phone and began dialing numbers from memory. The first call went to Captain Morrison, whose charter boat was equipped with marine radio capable of reaching every vessel in a 50-mile radius. The second call went to Tommy Vasquez, whose lobster boat had been modified with electronics that could have come from a military surplus store. What are you doing? Clara asked. Calling in the cavalry. Within minutes, Evan could see lights beginning to flicker on across the harbor, fishing boats, pleasure craft, and commercial vessels starting their engines, despite the storm. The marine radio crackled to life with terse communications in the coded language that harbor communities used when coordinating emergency responses. Clara, 5 minutes, Michael said from the laptop screen. But his confident tone had developed a slight edge of uncertainty. Michael, you made one critical mistake, Clara said, her fingers still flying across the keyboard. You assumed I was working alone. What do you mean? I mean that while you were busy tracking me down, I was busy making copies, lots of copies, distributed to people who understand exactly what they're holding and what to do with it if something happens to me. It was a bluff, but Michael's expression suggested it was an effective one. Corporate executives lived in fear of information they couldn't control, evidence they couldn't suppress, witnesses they couldn't intimidate or eliminate. You're lying, maybe, but are you willing to bet Meridian's survival on that assumption? The countdown timer showed 3 minutes and 18 seconds. Outside, the harbor was coming alive with activity that had nothing to do with normal maritime operations. Boats were positioning themselves in patterns that suggested coordination rather than chaos, and the marine radio traffic was increasing exponentially. Clara, whatever you're planning, it won't work. My security team is professionally trained and heavily armed. Your local fishermen are amateurs playing at soldier. Your security team consists of corporate enforcers who've never faced anything more dangerous than congressional investigators, Evans said. Our fishermen survive North Atlantic storms for a living. Want to guess who's tougher? The laptop screen flickered again, and Michael's confident expression was replaced by obvious concern. Someone off camera was speaking to him urgently, though the words were too muffled to understand. It seems your cavalry is more effective than anticipated, Michael said when he returned his attention to the video call. My people are reporting unusual activity throughout the harbor area. Unusual how? Clara asked innocently. Boats moving in coordinated patterns, radio communications on encrypted frequencies, spotlights being deployed in search configurations. Michael's voice grew sharp with irritation. What exactly are your fishermen friends planning? I have no idea, Evans said truthfully. But they've been protecting this harbor from outside threats for over a century. I doubt they're going to stop now. The countdown timer showed 1 minute and 43 seconds. Clara's fingers were moving frantically across her keyboard, trying to restore the file transfer before time ran out. Last chance. Clara, delete the files and surrender, or face the consequences. Go to hell. Michael, as you wish. The laptop screen went dark, and the countdown timer disappeared. For a moment. The library was silent except for the storm outside and the distant sound of boat engines echoing across the water. Then all hell broke loose. The first explosion came from the harbor. A brilliant flash of light followed by thunder that had nothing to do with the storm. Emergency sirens began wailing throughout the town, and the marine radio erupted with urgent communications as Millbrook Bay's defenders engaged Meridian security forces in a battle that would determine whether justice or corporate power would prevail. The emergency radio in the library's reference section crackled to life, its ancient circuits carrying Captain Morrison's weathered voice through the storm-torn night. All vessels, this is harbor control. We have hostile forces attempting to access the main pier. Repeat, hostile forces are moving against the harbor. All fishing vessels to defensive positions. All pleasure craft to safe harbor immediately. Evan lunged for the radio, his years of harbor experience allowing him to operate the unfamiliar equipment intuitively. Morrison, this is Evan Callahan. What's your situation? Evan, where the hell are you? We've got at least 12 armed men moving in from the access road, plus what looks like a command vehicle parked behind the fish processing plant. They came in quiet, but Tommy Vasquez spotted them on his night vision scope. Clara looked up from her laptop, where she'd managed to restore partial connectivity to her upload servers. How much more time do you need? Evan asked her. 20 minutes minimum for the critical files, 45 for the complete database. Morrison, we need to hold them for at least 20 minutes. Can you do that? Hell, son. We've been preparing for something like this since the summer people started trying to turn our harbor into their private playground. We can hold them all night if necessary. The radio fell silent except for the background hiss of storm interference. Through the library windows, Evan could see spotlights sweeping across the harbor as boats maneuvered into defensive positions. What had started as a corporate security operation was rapidly escalating into something resembling naval warfare. This is insane, Clara said, though her fingers never paused in their work to bypass Meridian's electronic interference. I never intended for anyone else to get hurt because of my evidence. They made that choice when they threatened Saudi and when they murdered Tommy. Evan checked the ammunition in the .45 pistol he'd retrieved from his truck. Besides, this community has been waiting for an excuse to push back against corporate bullying for decades. You just gave them a target worthy of their anger. The battle for Millbrook Bay raged through the night. Tommy Vasquez's experimental flare launcher sent cascades of burning magnesium across the harbor, turning night into brilliant day for 30 seconds while simultaneously deploying chaff designed to confuse electronic surveillance systems. Captain Morrison's charter boat had positioned itself between the marina and the approaching assault craft, its deck modified with what appeared to be commercial fishing equipment repurposed for combat. Meanwhile, Clara worked frantically to complete the upload, her fingers flying across the keyboard as evidence files streamed to servers around the world. 96%, she reported. Everything except the financial records that could have sent Meridian's board to prison for life. Just when it seemed they might succeed, a new threat emerged. Meridian's reinforcements arrived larger vessels with the electromagnetic signatures of military hardware, bringing serious firepower to bear on what they now recognized as a threat to their corporate survival. "We need to go now," Evan urged. "2 more minutes for complete transmission. We can't abandon it now. Not when we're this close." The third assault boat had been circling at maximum range, apparently serving as a command and control platform for the corporate forces. Now it accelerated toward them in what looked like a suicide run, its crew apparently willing to sacrifice themselves to prevent the complete evidence upload. That's when Evan remembered something crucial. Tommy's old toolkit, a battered collection of wrenches and gauges that had somehow found their way aboard Clara's vessel, along with his brother's factory ID badge. But these weren't just ordinary tools. Tommy had modified them over the years, adding electronic components and wireless capabilities that turned simple mechanical devices into sophisticated surveillance and countermeasures equipment. "I've got an idea," Evan said, remembering his brother's fascination with marine electronics and improvised engineering solutions. Tommy always said that the best weapon was the one your enemy didn't see coming. He grabbed Tommy's old toolkit and activated a device that looked like a standard marine multimeter, but functioned as a powerful electromagnetic pulse generator. Tommy had designed it to disable malfunctioning boat electronics safely, but with the right modifications. It could do much more than that. The approaching assault boat was 50 yards away and closing fast when Evan triggered Tommy's final gift to the fight for justice. The electromagnetic pulse spread outward from the yacht like an invisible wave, washing over the corporate forces with energy that shut down every electronic system within a quarter-mile radius, including, unfortunately, Clara's yacht. As darkness fell across their defensive systems and the evidence upload ground to a halt with seconds remaining, Evan realized that their victory had come at a cost that might prove fatal. The corporate forces were disabled, but so were they, and in the sudden electronic silence, they could hear the approach of Meridian's reinforcements, larger vessels with backup power systems that had weathered Tommy's electromagnetic storm intact. "How much of the upload completed?" Evan asked, his hands moving across control panels that Tommy's designs had taught him to understand. 96%, Clara replied, her voice tight with frustration. "Everything except the financial records that could have sent Meridian's board to prison for life." It seemed like a crushing defeat. Then, through the rain-streaked windows, they saw something unexpected, a Coast Guard cutter emerging from the storm like an avenging angel, its deck guns trained on Meridian's reinforcement vessels. Behind it came 2 more cutters and what appeared to be a federal law enforcement command ship, overwhelming force that reduced the corporate security operation from military assault to criminal conspiracy in a matter of minutes. "Millbrook Bay, this is Coast Guard Cutter Portland. We are responding to reports of armed conflict in your harbor. All vessels stand down immediately and prepare for boarding." Clara and Evan exchanged glances. The Coast Guard's arrival could be salvation or disaster, depending on how deeply Meridian's influence had penetrated federal law enforcement agencies. "This is Dr. Clara Sinclair aboard the research vessel Integrity," Clara responded using her yacht's emergency transmitter. "I am a federal whistleblower under active protection status. The armed vessels in this harbor are corporate security forces attempting to prevent disclosure of criminal evidence. Dr. Sinclair, this is Commander Sarah Chen, U.S. Coast Guard. We have been monitoring your evidence transmissions for the past hour. Federal marshals are en route to secure your position and take custody of all evidence." Evan started. "Chen any relation to Margaret?" Clara's face broke into the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all night. Commander Chen is Margaret's daughter, the one who joined the Coast Guard after her father died in that factory accident. The cavalry isn't coming, Evans said with growing realization. The cavalry is already here. But victory came with a price that nearly broke Evans' heart. The financial records that hadn't uploaded the evidence that would have implicated Meridian's board of directors and major shareholders had been corrupted by the electromagnetic pulse. The people at the top will probably escape prosecution, Clara said, her voice hollow with disappointment. Evan felt rage build in his chest like a physical force. They'd come so close to complete justice, only to have it slip away because of the same electromagnetic weapon that had saved their lives. No, he said firmly. Tommy didn't die so that corporate executives could walk away from their crimes on technicalities. He grabbed Tommy's toolkit and began pulling out devices that most people would have dismissed as ordinary mechanical equipment. But Evan had spent years learning his brother's modifications, understanding the electronic components hidden within seemingly simple tools. What are you doing? Tommy was paranoid about data security. He always made backup copies of everything important. Evan held up what looked like a standard torque wrench, but functioned as a wireless storage device. If he was investigating Meridian safety violations, if he'd found evidence of financial crimes, the wrench's hidden display activated, showing terabytes of data that Tommy had collected during his months of investigation financial records. Bank transfers, shell company documentation, everything needed to prove that Meridian's crimes went straight to the top of their corporate hierarchy. Tommy knew, Clara whispered, staring at the evidence that had been hidden in his brother's tools for 5 years. He knew about the financial conspiracy, and he documented everything before they killed him. He was always smarter than me, Evan said, tears mixing with rain on his face. Even dead, he's still protecting people. Clara connected Tommy's hidden storage device to her yacht's restored communication system. The financial evidence began uploading immediately, completing the data set that would destroy Meridian Energy's criminal empire once and for all. Upload complete, she announced as federal agents began boarding the disabled corporate vessels around them. Every piece of evidence, every financial record, every communication that proves systematic criminal conspiracy, it's all out there now. Commander Chen's voice came over the radio with news that made their victory complete. Dr. Sinclair, Mr. Callahan, we have federal arrest warrants for 47 Meridian Energy executives, including CEO Michael Reeves. The evidence you've provided has triggered the largest corporate criminal investigation in FBI history. Evan looked out across Millbrook Bay, where Coast Guard cutters were taking corporate assassins into federal custody, while local fishing boats returned to their moorings like conquering heroes. The storm was finally breaking, revealing the first hints of dawn on the eastern horizon. It's over, Clara said, her voice mixing exhaustion with profound relief. No, Evan replied, thinking about Tommy's sacrifice and the community that had risked everything to support their fight for justice. It's just beginning. 6 months later, Evan stood on the same pier where Clara had first arrived in Millbrook Bay, watching his daughter unveil her latest art installation. The memorial sculpture rose from the harbor's edge like a testament to renewal twisted metal that had once been part of Meridian Energy's chemical processing equipment, transformed by Sadi's artistic vision into something that spoke of both loss and hope. The memorial to corporate victims incorporated Clara's advanced marine technology in ways that would have made Tommy proud. Solar panels designed from Clara's clean energy patents powered LED displays that cycled through the names of workers who had died in industrial accidents over the past 3 decades. Water circulation systems based on the same technology that had once powered Clara's yacht created gentle fountains that seemed to wash the names clean while preserving their memory. She's remarkable, Clara said. Joining Evan at the railing, the past 6 months had changed her. The constant weariness was gone, replaced by the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing the fight had been worth the cost. The federal prosecutions had exceeded even Clara's optimistic expectations. Michael Reeves and 36 other Meridian executives were awaiting trial on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to systematic environmental terrorism. The company itself had been dissolved, its assets liquidated to create a victim compensation fund that would provide support for affected communities for decades to come. But the most satisfying outcome from Evan's perspective was watching Millbrook Bay transform itself from a struggling fishing village into something approaching a model community. Clara's clean marine technology had attracted investment from environmental organizations and responsible corporations that wanted to demonstrate sustainable coastal development. The harbor now hosted research vessels alongside fishing boats, and the economy had diversified beyond simple survival. Dad Clara, Sadie approached them with paint still drying on her hands and the satisfied expression of an artist who'd successfully translated vision into reality. At 18, she'd grown into the kind of young woman who turned heads not just because of her beauty, but because of the quiet intensity that marked her as someone who would make her mark on the world. "So what do you think?" she asked, gesturing toward the memorial. "I think your uncle would have loved it," Evan said honestly. "He always believed that beautiful things could grow from terrible circumstances if people were willing to do the work." Clara helped with the technical stuff, Sadie said, her tone carrying the kind of casual acknowledgement that suggested Clara's presence in their lives had become as natural as breathing. "Her water circulation design is going to be featured in next month's Environmental Engineering Journal. It's a collaboration," Clara said diplomatically. "The artistic vision is entirely Sadie's. I just provided some mechanical support." Evan watched the easy interaction between his daughter and the woman who had become so much more than just a customer with boat trouble. The three of them had formed something that felt like family, not the traditional nuclear unit he'd once taken for granted, but something harder won and perhaps more precious because of the struggles that had forged it. "Dad Clara, there's something I want to ask you both." Sadie's serious tone caught their attention immediately. Over the past 6 months, she'd become the family mediator, the one who addressed practical issues that the adults were sometimes too polite or too emotionally invested to raise directly. "What's on your mind?" Evan asked. "Are you two ever going to admit that you're in love with each other? Or are you planning to spend the rest of your lives dancing around it like teenagers?" Evan felt heat creep up his neck, but Clara just laughed, the first completely unself-conscious sound he'd heard from her since the night they'd first kissed in the aftermath of their victory over Meridian. "Your daughter has excellent observational skills," Clara said to Evan. "I wonder where she gets that from. Probably from her mother. Sarah was always direct about things that mattered." "Uh, Well then," Clara said, taking his hand with the kind of decisiveness that had once made her a successful corporate executive and later an effective whistleblower. "Maybe it's time to be direct about this." She turned to face him fully, her eyes holding the same courage that had sustained her through 5 years of running and fighting and never giving up hope that justice was possible. "Evan Callahan, I love you. I love your stubborn commitment to doing the right thing even when it's dangerous. I love the way you've raised your daughter to be strong and independent and kind. I love that you're the kind of man who would risk everything to honor his brother's memory. And I love that you've made it possible for me to believe in home again." "Clara Sinclair," Evan replied, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I love you too. I love your courage, your intelligence, your refusal to let evil go unpunished even when fighting it cost you everything. I love that you've taught my daughter to see beauty in broken things and hope in impossible circumstances. And I love that you've made it possible for me to believe in the future again." Sadie applauded with paint-stained hands, grinning with the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully orchestrated a long-overdue moment of honesty. "Finally now, are you going to get married or what?" "Sadie," Evan protested, but Clara was already laughing again, as the afternoon sun painted Millbrook Bay in shades of gold and amber. The three of them stood together beside Sadie's memorial to the victims of corporate greed. Around them, the harbor bustled with the activities of a community that had found new purpose in the aftermath of their fight for justice. Fishing boats prepared for the evening's lobster haul. Research vessels collected data that would help protect the coastal environment for future generations. And in the distance, Clara's yacht, now permanently moored and converted into a floating museum dedicated to corporate accountability, served as a reminder that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Tommy Callahan's fight for worker safety had become a catalyst for changes that would protect countless lives. His death had found meaning in the courage of people who refused to let his sacrifice be forgotten, and in the gentle sound of water flowing through Saudi's memorial fountains. Evan could almost hear Tommy's voice saying what he'd always said when faced with seemingly impossible challenges. One step at a time, little brother, one step at a time. The future stretched ahead like an uncharted harbor, full of possibilities that seemed less daunting when faced together. Justice had been served, love had been acknowledged, and hope had taken root in ground that had once seemed barren. In Millbrook Bay, the tide was finally turning towards something better.